in a world where trauma is real, where people seek out distraction from their internal lives and relationships with others, and where no one is taught healthy self-care, help was needed. In 2019, the mission began. Find a way to help people understand and better their mental health. Seek out ways to explore relationships and how they work. Fight against the stigmas that surround counseling and therapy. And, most importantly,
do all of that so you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. Hey everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me here in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Here we are, 2 weeks into Love Month, and we're sticking with our month-long celebration and examination of love and relationships. This week's guest is Melanie Rogers. Melanie is the founder of Come Alive Counseling here in Nashville. As a therapist, she loves inviting people to explore their own interior landscapes, challenging them to be intrigued with the bigger story being told in and through their lives. Melanie loves nothing more than to see her clients discovering, recovering, and living from their true self. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. I want to learn everything about everything. I want to eat it all up. I want to discover myself. I want to dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Melanie.
Hi.
Hi. Welcome to the theater. I am so glad to have you today. I like to start every interview by asking my guest, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Well, thankfully, you'd given me the question before today, so I had a little time to think about it. And I'd actually listened to other episodes where you'd ask other therapists this question. And I heard a lot of kind of a second career. It's kind of came to it because of my own therapy or things like that. And I was like, gosh, that'd be a cool story. It's just not my story. So it's kind of the thing where it's the thing I can't not do.
Okay.
As far as like when that started or kind of when I knew, I think I'm always evolving in what therapy looks like. As a high school kid, it looked like being the listener to all my friends, and kind of at a party, I would be like the one that was over in the corner listening to someone who's having a hard time or exploring their questions about God and life and their family. And so it's kind of like the thing I've always done. Obviously, I didn't have as much access to myself or any training. And I think a lot of it was out of a loneliness and a desire to connect. But it's kind of like that, it's just evolved. That curiosity about people, that longing to connect, just, I think, a deep care for people and empathy for people that are hurting. I think it's just grown and evolved. And, and I think obviously I had no training then, and it was probably motivated to meet a lot of my own needs then, obviously.
I was wondering when you said in like high school, the question that came to my mind is, I wonder at that point in life what you got out of it.
Yeah.
Like, what was the payoff for you?
Yeah, I think it was a way to connect but feel safer. Because I think that's what we're always trying to do is connect and get love in the safest way possible.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I had learned in my own family to connect by being curious about the other person. And so I think it was just a skill that I had already developed in my own family to get connection, asking questions, being curious.
Did you feel like within that kind of family message that you were getting, did you feel like there was room for you? Or did you feel like, you know, everybody else needs to be prioritized above me, and if I meet this need in them, then that is me earning my spot?
Similar but a little different. Like you've got the gist of it. I think space for me, certainly it was a way for me to get some needs met. Right. I'm not sure if I would say is there space. Yeah, I guess space for me, but in the way of, am I, just maybe wanting to be pursued more, like someone to be more curious about me.
So were you giving in a way that you were trying to show them, here's what I would like?
Not consciously.
So you kind of got down the path of therapy by, I guess, being there for your friends, like listening to them, trying to offer empathy, support, understanding. Was there anything that maybe like kind of lit that spark of, oh man, I could maybe get trained in this and get paid for it?
Right. I think that came way later. So that was just trying to give you kind of early roots, kind of the early formative makings of I guess a therapist. I think it's like in college I majored in psychology, and then I quickly switched to family and child development because it made more sense to me at 18 that a person in the context of their relationships made more sense to me than I had a very limited understanding of psychology, but it seemed more like just understanding the psyche of the person and a person in a system, and approaching it that way made more sense. So, but even at 18, I was studying psychology, so, but in terms of therapy, therapy started in 2013. That was way later. I mean, I was in the counseling field. I've been in the counseling field since 2001, but therapy is in 4 walls, therapist couch. That came way later because I was not sure I could bring all of me in genuine love and care into the therapy room. And I just had to really figure out that by doing it. Like, can it be real? Yeah. And so,
were you not doing that in high school when it wasn't like a job or a major?
I felt like I felt like I was doing it in an authentic way. I just stereotypes, just misunderstanding, just having never done therapy.
Yeah. I
didn't know if you're paying someone. I think that's the key thing. Could there be actual care and love and attachment? Could it be real?
I get that. Yeah.
So I think I just had to know that by doing it. I had to learn that.
So did you go as a client and that helped you understand more? Or?
Not that part. I think maybe. Yes, maybe. But more by being the therapist. I think I had to be the therapist to know that I could bring all of me.
Sure.
And genuinely care about people.
Which I think makes sense. This is not a job where it is, you just repeat a series of movements and accomplish a task. Like, you bring your whole self to the room, and you are fully present in each moment. And if you're not, then I don't know, it just doesn't work.
It's not very enjoyable.
Yeah. And so figuring out, is this something I can do? I think you kind of have to try to do it. Like, and thankfully that comes after a couple years of study and training that you get to sit in a room with somebody. But yeah, I get that.
And then even after, studying that in college and studying family and child development, and did an emphasis in adolescent development. So that my first love was kind of that age group, adolescence. But even after that, I worked on a college campus with a college ministry. And, I found myself into people's stories and family of origin and what was your relationship with your dad like. And I felt like that is where I was drawn more than teaching a book of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, in those 4 years, I wanted to integrate spirituality with psychology and understanding people and them understanding them in the context of their families. But I kept being drawn to the stories and the people more than the teaching of kind of the more, maybe a little bit less of the spiritual side. So even in a job that wasn't therapy, I was doing therapy. I was driving kids to Memphis to do therapy. I mean, so it's been the thing that's always been there, but maybe just not formalized. It's kind of evolved as I've changed and grown. And
well, if therapy is developing a relationship with someone in which you feel safe enough to talk about your thoughts and feelings and needs and fears and desires and longings, and you get to feel heard and you get to feel seen, if that's what therapy is, then being in someone's life, being that safe person, that's definitely therapeutic.
Yeah.
Right. It's just that we get to get paid for it.
Right. I think that's the word. It's before I was really equipped, I was probably doing therapeutic type relationships. I mean, I was a basketball coach of a girls' little basketball team when I was in grad school, and they called me the team psychiatrist. They didn't know really what a psychiatrist was, but they were picking up on it.
Yeah, they were seeing that you were meeting a need. Yeah.
And it was less about the basketball and more about the relationship. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I think, if the world was a perfect place and relationships ran just perfectly, we wouldn't have a job.
Correct.
There wouldn't be any need for us, but it's not. And so our job then becomes, well, how do we sit with one person at a time and help change their world? Help them change their world, I should say. Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool.
So it feels like it's going to keep evolving too.
Well,
right?
I hope so. Because I mean, I would hope, and really the main reason why I ask, questions like why therapy, tell me something that your clients taught you, is because I think one of the barriers that people have, the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy is the therapist. They think we're another white coat that's going to come in and talk at them, when really we're people. We have our own hurts and hang-ups and habits and histories, and we have stuff we like and don't like, and we have each of us has different styles that we engage with clients with, and so it's just kind of trying to help people realize, hey, we're just a person, and it's okay to come, and it's okay to be scared and be nervous, because what we want to help you do is to learn that it's okay to trust us, and it's okay for an hour a week to let the guard down and know that we're going to do our best to take care of you. Not take care of you like baby you, but to help you feel comfortable, I should say.
Right.
Yeah, and since we keep evolving as people, we keep changing, then the way that we practice would too, as we grow.
Yeah. And hopefully I'm in a process of becoming more human, comfortable with my humanness as well, because if I'm not, I really can't help them do the same.
That's true. It's tough to take somebody to a place you've never been. Yeah. Well, that is going to lead into our discussion about the movie. What movie did you bring for us to talk about this week?
After much deliberation, I chose the movie Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix and Amy Adams. Somehow that movie came up, and I just had all kinds of feelings about it. Maybe I'd seen it one time before. I knew I was going to be.
So what was it about that movie that pulled you in away from the others?
Yeah. I think it is such a timely movie for what is happening in our culture. I think it asks at least it stirs up more questions than answers in me. So I think and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but just our relationship with technology, I think it, just where we are as a culture. But really why I chose it is I think it's a movie about what it's like to be human and our need for connection.
Yeah.
And the difficulties in finding the connection we're made for, that we long for. I think it's a movie about just longing for intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think Spike Jonze, the writer-producer, chose this to talk about what it means to be a human and our desire to connect by using a man's relationship with his Siri, his operating system, which I think is a sign of the times.
You know what? I just looked up on IMDb like what year this came out, because like I said, I saw it in the theater. It says it came out in 2013.
Right.
I thought it was before that.
Okay.
2013 feels really close for some reason. 2013 was the year that I started therapy as a client.
Okay.
7 years ago.
Wow.
And I think something about the movie felt a little distant when I watched it when it first came out. Watching it, because I watched it this morning. I got up at 5:30 and watched it.
Wow.
Something about watching it now feels like, oh my gosh, we're almost living it.
I think
we're so close.
I think we're living it or past it.
Yeah.
Based on what I'm seeing and hearing and studying and just So I don't remember exactly where Siri was at the time, where the development, when Siri came out, I don't remember, but it's meant to be slightly futuristic. It's it's set in a slightly futuristic Los Angeles. And I remember seeing it and thinking it seemed futuristic. And 7 years later, it's a little behind in terms of what is available on the world, on the internet.
It almost feels like stylistically the movie has a little future and a little past in it. Like there's some technologies that we either already have, like everybody has these earbuds that are wireless that they are using to interact with their operating systems. So we got earbuds now, or AirPods now. Clearly the phone and the computer are all tied together. That's iCloud. But also everybody kind of sort of dresses like it's the early 70s.
Yeah. I think he's predicting a comeback of the high-waisted trousers.
Oh my gosh. That was something I did think when I first saw it, was everybody's pants are above their belly button.
Yeah. I think that's a throwback, kind of like the Wallaby,
Yeah. And nobody wears a belt either.
Yeah.
So maybe that's Spike Jonze's real lifestyle. He rocks pants that way.
He may.
He's advocating for the rest of us too as well. But it does kind of make me think, tying together things from the past and then things you could argue that he's predicting of the future. What's he trying to say with that? Our relationships with our past selves and our future selves, or our past selves versus our trajectory of where we're going. The basic too long didn't read of the story is Joaquin Phoenix, whose character's name, I am terrible with character names, by the way. Theodore. So he is a writer who writes letters for people to people that they love.
Yeah, like it's called Beautifully Handwritten Letters. And so what I think is interesting about lots of things are interesting to me about the director's choice of Theodore's profession. So it's he's a romantic, he's very perceptive, he's a deeply sensitive man who writes Hallmark cards, basically, very personalized Hallmark cards in the handwriting of the person, but he writes them. So you kind of source out your
And they're not generalized. Like
Right.
he somehow, because he said at one point, I've been writing letters for them since
20
9
years.
years or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he says at one point he references a woman's like little crooked tooth or something.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody asks him, well, how'd you know that? And he's like, oh, because I've been doing it so long.
Right.
So he's
yeah.
able to engage and learn and with or of people, which I think is different than with people. But yeah, he's not writing these general Hallmark cards. He's writing specific letters
Mm-hmm.
from a mom to a son, from a dad to a daughter, from a husband to a wife. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I think that's part of one of the themes of the movie is connection and disconnection. So in so many ways, he highlights that theme. And I think the cards are interesting because while they're handwritten, someone else wrote them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this
Well, technically, they're not even handwritten because he's dictating to a computer, and the computer is
right. So
doing
it has this feel of connection, authentic, old-fashioned letters, but it's disconnected because the person sending the letter didn't write it. So there's this disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that theme I think is all over the place.
We could call it false intimacy.
I think that is. I don't know if you ask Spike Jonze, he would say the movie is about false intimacy, but I think it's our longing for the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he develops, Samantha is the operating system's name, and it is the closest thing to a person that could meet all of your needs. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, she meets so many human needs. It's a device meant to meet our human longings.
It's a companion.
It's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he does that as a job. He is in the final stages of a divorce.
Right.
And I think it would be conservative to say isolating himself.
He seems very isolated.
Yeah. And then I don't know if the Samantha operating system was something that he chose to opt into, or if it's just like if it's an iPhone, it's not. But if it was, like, everybody gets one automatically because of an update. But whatever it is, this update to an operating system happens, and then it calibrates to him specifically. It asks him a few questions.
Interesting question.
Yeah.
I thought this was interesting. What was your relationship like with your mother? And even ironically there, or not ironically, but he says, the thing about my mother is she would ask me a question about me, and it would always end up being about her. And he inadvertently ends up doing that with Samantha, like reenacting that same dynamic. I just think that's just super smart of Spike Jonze to point out that, I don't know, there's so many little things in there.
So it calibrates to him, and then because his phone and his computer are all kind of one, and the phone kind of stays on him at all times, and he has these wireless headphones, she kind of becomes a second voice in his head almost. Like it becomes a disembodied companion that's with him all the time.
Right.
That has total engagement in his life, at least the digital version of it, and that he's just kind of constantly talking to. He ends up developing a quote-unquote relationship with it, which that'll be probably what we talk the most about, and then falling in love with this digital assistant. All the while, I think it's teaching him about interacting with real people.
I think there's points of disruption in his fantasy of who he wants Samantha to be. And I'm not denying his feelings aren't real. I think they were probably real, felt real to him. But I think the fantasy of, kind of back to what you were saying before about the, you said fantasy relationship or ideal, I can't remember what you called it.
An ideal version versus a real version.
Right. I can't remember how you said it. Something like a fantasy version, but it starts unraveling at some point, and we can talk about that. But his fantasy of who he needs or thinks Samantha is starts unraveling. And then I think that starts to bring him back to what is real, and is this real, and is this relationship real? And so I think
I got to a place, and this wasn't during the movie, this was after, and I think it's a little more philosophical than I typically go, but I got to the place of starting to think about like artificial intelligence, and can it ever be, I guess, autonomous and independent? And if it was, what does that mean for us as humans and that kind of thing? I don't know if that is really relevant to, that's a little meta. So I don't know if that's really relevant to what the show's about, but here we have a person. So at least in my understanding of, and I think that you and I have this in common, I primarily work with people who are sex addicts. And I use that as an umbrella term, so it can include many things: pornography addiction to having affairs, addiction to love, relationships, things like that. But one of the things, the ways that I conceptualize it is a person who is suffering from addictions is unable to establish and maintain healthy, long-lasting emotional bonds.
Right.
And so
at the bottom, it's for love and sex addiction, at least, it's a disorder of intimacy. And yeah. And
I think what you were saying about, Samantha, he's kind of wrestling with, what does he want her to be? What is she? I think at the beginning, we talked a little bit about the operating system itself asks these questions and tailors itself to him. At the beginning, she is basically his fantasy. She is his ideal. She is meant as a thing that, I don't know about, I guess maybe serves him, because she, does all the things that Siri does and that kind of thing. And then she begins to grow and develop and change, until she makes choices on her own.
Which is, I think, an interesting parallel to Theodore's marriage. He'll flash back to memories with his wife, and kind of the theme, or kind of what it seems like happens in their marriage, is they evolve and grow in different ways, and eventually get to a point where their differences are, they scare each other, the ways that they're both growing, and they decide that connection is not something they want to continue to work on. So what I think the relationship with Samantha highlights is Samantha keeps evolving as she, I guess, gets more information, and she eventually gets to a point where she's communicating with so many people at one time, and Theodore finds out, and it's so disillusioning to him. He thought he was the only one.
He takes it as if she's cheating.
Yes, he does not feel special anymore. Yeah. He feels betrayed, it seems. And so, but I think it's interesting because I think simultaneously the movie is showing this parallel, real human relationship where people are evolving and growing and changing, and the marriage ends. And same thing happens with Theodore's relationship with Samantha. Samantha keeps evolving and growing, and I guess Theodore too in his own way, but Samantha's growing so fast and evolving so much that she can't, I can't remember how she says it, but she can't stay just with him anymore.
Yeah.
She has to leave.
She
gets too smart.
Yeah. Exponentially.
Correct.
And I think, like all humans, he changes incrementally.
Right.
So he has these little baby steps of, enlightenment and insight and evaluation and reflection and intention. Whereas, I think towards the beginning, she says something along the lines of, he says something, she goes, so I read a book about this and I learned this. And he's like, you read a book? A whole book? Like just then? And she goes, yeah, in 0.81 seconds, right. I read a whole book, so she is just, because she's electronic and, has access to the whole internet, constantly just doubling, tripling, quadrupling her knowledge.
Right.
which I guess like, I don't want to say useless knowledge, but maybe like fact-based knowledge, but also kind of examining, I'm sure, as many algorithms and programs do that are in our real lives today, human behavior in
Right.
such a way that she gains understanding of motivation and
Yeah.
choice. And
I mean, she says to him, you taught me how to want. So she is evolving not only intellectually, but she's becoming more human. Like she is learning to desire and eventually desires a body, to have a body. Anyways, but I think the interesting thing is just that it's paralleling like this kind of in his real human marriage, this thing that happens in relationships. People grow and change and evolve. Maybe, like one partner is evolving differently, or maybe he's doing their own work and doing their own therapy, and the partner's not growing as much, in their own, not doing their own work. And so there's this gap. I mean, you see that pretty often. Does that make sense? Like, and then kind of, there's a kind of a decision point, like, what are we going to do with this gap? I don't know. It's just interesting that same dynamic he highlights, with Theodore and Samantha. It's just, he chooses to highlight that human dynamic with a computer, with Theodore in the computer, just this growing distance.
what do you think the payoff is for Theodore? What do you think he gets from engaging with Samantha, the operating system, that he doesn't get from, I don't want to even say like his soon-to-be ex-wife, but just people in general?
Yeah. I wrote down when I watched the movie like 3 or 4 times. But what just kind of was, one time watched it just for human needs that were met by Samantha. Like what kind of was the enticement? What was the, and a couple of things seemed to really light him up. And one was like, you understand me. Another one was, acceptance. Just when he fears being judged, or is that weird? Or does that make me, I don't know. There's just this longing for acceptance. And she does those things beautifully. Companionship, I think, like you were saying before, I mean, she goes with him on these Sunday adventures to the beach and to the fair, and he can just have this constant, just companion to share adventures with, to share experiences with. So her availability, I think, is huge. Just she is so available, literally 24/7.
Yeah.
Middle of the night, I can't sleep. Are you there? Samantha, are you there? I mean, just that availability.
Sometimes she would even call him
Right.
to wake him up.
Right. And she doesn't demand anything. So it's this needless, really, I mean, she starts evolving and saying, gosh, I want to be able to physically touch you. Right. So, but she's kind of needless. She doesn't really require much of him. So that sounds kind of great sometimes,
Which I think is, like, if we're going to look at it through the lens of at least sex addiction, or maybe any kind of addiction.
Yeah, and I guess I'm looking at it more from a love addiction, because he doesn't seem addicted. I mean, certainly he has a relationship with pornography, but he seems more lit up, if you want to use that word. He seems more like the dopamine hit for him is more the romance and the fantasy of this person, the idealized kind of falling in love feelings. Feel like the feeling understood, like no one has ever understood me. The being accepted, like no one has ever accepted me. That feels like more the hit for him than an orgasm. Do you know, like than that release. So I if I was going to conceptualize him, and I'm not going to say he's an addict or he's not, because I would need to know more, but it seems more along the love addiction, kind of that vein than.
Well, I think if we look at it through the lens of fantasy.
Correct.
So I kind of distinguish fantasy and imagination as opposite ends of a spectrum. Fantasy is used to escape. Imagination is used to engage. Fantasy is used to tear down disengage from. Imagination is used to create. And so with fantasy, and especially in my work with porn addicts, fantasy is I have relational and emotional needs that are traditionally, met through relationship, but the cost of relationship, which is vulnerability and intimacy, is too high, and I either can't or I'm unwilling to pay it. So I turn to pornography to get these needs met because A, it's on demand. I can access it
like the
anytime I want.
availability factor, right?
Yeah. And B, it doesn't cost me anything.
No risk.
I don't have to pay in vulnerability or intimacy.
Yep.
They are at my beck and call to meet my needs without me having to then be present for and engaged in and be there for them. And I think it seems to me like the, development or journey of his relationship with Samantha is kind of that, but in reverse. At the beginning, she is that, he's receiving from her. She's on demand. He doesn't have to pay anything in. And then as she grows and develops and starts asking for things, that's when she starts to begin talking with other operating systems, other people. That's when he starts to all of a sudden feel like, well, this isn't right. I don't like this, questioning her. And then she just keeps going until she eventually leaves. But, it's that same kind of thing of real relationships cost too much.
Yeah.
Which I think really the crux and the conflict of this movie is being presented with something that on the surface looks like an unreal relationship, but is being treated as a real relationship in the context of the film. Even to the point where he goes on a double date with Samantha and another couple.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like there's with technology or with operating systems or phones. There's the good and the bad, right? And I would say one of the if there's a redeeming quality in this relationship, I think it helps him be more in touch with what is real in relationships. Because I think his fantasy about Samantha starts to unravel when he signs the divorce papers with his wife, and she's like, "You're in love with your operating system? Oh, well, that's convenient because you couldn't really handle real relationship and real feelings." And it's soon after that he's like in a depressed state, and really pulls away from Samantha. And I think he's really just kind of reconsidering and reevaluating.
That shame that comes up?
Probably, I would imagine a little bit. I think shame and just a re-examining of himself and where, he seemed to really care for this woman, and kind of from his end, where the relationship broke down is
the woman, the wife?
The wife, okay, yeah. And he said, I think I hid myself from her. Samantha's asking, why didn't the relationship work, and why is she angry at you? And she said, well, I think I hid myself from her. So that fear of vulnerability with his wife, I think, was part of the reason the marriage dissolved. And she was, she had her own issues, but
that's something that I was wondering as you were talking before. You were kind of saying people continuing to evolve and grow and this gap appearing. I would say that in healthy relationships that do last, people continue to grow and evolve. So same thing,
right?
Yet a gap doesn't develop. What is it that causes the gap? And how is it that in some gaps don't appear?
Yeah, that's a great question. How is it that gaps don't? I don't know. I don't hear about gapless marriages. So
interesting.
I always feel like there's some loneliness that friends, clients, anyone describes. I don't hear about perfect marriages, at least.
Well, I don't mean perfect, but
there's always a gap, I think. And I think
it seemed like what you were saying earlier is it was an insurmountable gap.
No, I was saying that I feel like the gap's a little bit inevitable, but what do you do with the gap?
Yeah.
Is the
So
question.
what do you do with the gap?
Right. So,
And what didn't they do to where
Right.
they ended up signing papers?
yeah, and there's a lot we don't know,
Mhm.
right? It seems like he fought for the marriage, and it took him, he was 6 months into, well, he didn't want to get divorced. And he delayed signing the divorce papers for 6 months. And when he's talking to Samantha, he's like, I wanted to stay married. I like being married. Samantha's challenging him on why his divorce attorney was hounding him about signing the papers. And he's like, I'm not signing them because I like being married. I wanted to be married. I think she was the one kind of pushing the
It's interesting though
divorce.
that he says, I like being married, not I love her and I need her.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, so I think I was making the point, like, it seems like in marriage, like a gap is, for whatever reason, is gonna happen. There's gonna be one person grows one way, their spiritual beliefs change, one partner does their own therapy and grows emotionally and doesn't feel connected to the spouse. That's gonna happen. It's, I think the question that he raises is kind of like, what are you gonna? Does that mean you just divorce? Does it mean what is, like, I think it begs questions.
I feel like intimacy is the answer, because if I continue to grow and change, and so does my wife,
Right.
if at some point I stop sharing who I am becoming with her, then it would make sense that she would stop being able to know who I am.
Yep.
So if I, with constant intention am giving of myself and who I am becoming to her, software updates, if you will, and remaining curious and engaged about who it is that she's becoming,
Right.
then it would stand to reason that we would be able to, if not grow together in the same way, continue to learn and be engaged with each other as we grow.
Right. And with Theodore, at least with Samantha, and maybe with his wife, Samantha's, and this is a computer, but Samantha's growth and the way she was evolving was very threatening to him. And so it just, he didn't really have a choice whether to stay with Samantha or not, but it seemed like that was kind of the end for him. Well, especially like she was with other people, like she's like,
quote unquote.
yeah, with other, yeah. So I don't think now this is a different, it's not a parallel to his marriage, but he wanted her all to himself, which I think in a marriage is a different thing with another human. But he could not. He was like, "You're either mine or you're not." And she goes, "No." Samantha says, "I'm yours,
And I'm not.
and I'm not, and I'm other people's." And that was kind of the human kind of.
I don't think I remember her saying I'm other people's. I thought and there might be a quote on IMDb, I thought it was I'm yours and I'm not, implying that she was her own as well.
Oh, okay, okay.
And when I heard that,
Yeah.
that actually rang pretty true to me, because I think that part of attachment, like especially when it comes to in a relationship, is you do have that safe haven. You do have that kind of secure knowledge of knowing I'm with this person, they're with me, I can depend on them, we are together in a way that they are not with others. But in the same kind of idea, you don't own them. Like, you don't get to say you can and can't go here or there.
Right.
You can or can't make a decision about your own life. You can or can't become this or that. They are their own person, while also I don't not belonging to you,
Right.
but maybe belonging with you.
Yeah, I would be interested to go back and see. Yeah, it's neither here nor there, I guess, exactly. But they just had very different views of, I can love you and love all these other people, or be in a relationship with all these other people. And Theodore was like, no, you can't. So there's kind of I don't know if that's a...
Well, he had all or nothing thinking in that particular instance, where it was, it's either all me or it's none of me. And it wasn't like you have the freedom to choose.
Right. So I guess there's one of the questions the movie presents is it feels like there is something redemptive in this relationship that maybe helped him overcome some of his fears and insecurities in order to move towards intimacy. But then was it really intimacy? It just brings up a lot of questions.
That's what I keep going back to. And that was that kind of like philosophical thing I was saying at the beginning was I keep kind of slipping into, because I know that the movie is presenting her as an actual independent, autonomous intelligence that maybe starts smaller and then grows into that other stuff.
Right.
But I think when we contextualize it into our world today, was it real? Was it a form of escape? Or was it an actual... Is it possible that a relationship can be real and still not meet every need? Because one thing that they kept kind of bumping up into, no pun intended, was this desire to have sex with each other. Obviously, her being a artificial intelligence, didn't have a body.
Right.
So she says a service.
Yeah.
And
surrogate.
Basically hires a surrogate body. So she hires a woman to come in. She knocks on the door. He goes to her. I can't remember. But he gives her a camera and an earpiece. She puts it on. And then they begin to make out.
Samantha's
while
voice.
Samantha is talking to him. And it's almost, I kind of pictured it as if it was a telepathic kind of conversation where Samantha was speaking, but the surrogate, wasn't
lip
syncing her words.
He was hearing Samantha's voice,
Yes.
but this woman seeing her face and her body.
Yeah. And so they begin to get hot and heavy. And it's pretty clear from the beginning that I don't know if it's that he's not into it, but that something feels really off to him.
Well, I think that's where we're back to the disconnected.
Yeah.
Like he feels this connection with her and then he starts to feel disconnected. So I feel like that's part of what you're naming is something feels off. Like something doesn't feel right. He's in love with the voice and the fantasy of Samantha, but it's this other woman's body. And I think he's just like short circuiting. He's just like, this does not feel connected.
I wonder if he had a picture of... I wonder if he pictured her looking a certain way.
I bet he did. I would imagine, because this was interesting, watching it 4 times. When the surrogate, he kind of got out of his head a little bit and was able to kind of start being sexual with her. And then she says, I want to see your face. Samantha says, I want to see your face. So this woman turns around and he sees her face, and then he just totally shuts down. He can't keep going from there. So that makes me want to say yes, because it was when she turned around and faced him, it was the reality of like, this is not Samantha. I don't know who it, this is not Samantha. And it was very disorienting for him.
It snapped him out of the fantasy.
I think so.
I thought it was interesting that when she presented the idea to him, she said, I contacted this service for a surrogate, and she really wants to be a part of our relationship or our story or something along those lines. And then when he gets snapped out of the fantasy, the surrogate lady starts crying and runs
rejected,
away.
yeah.
And then she even says, I just wanted to be a part of the relationship. And even that to me feels like there's some disconnection with her, because she's wanting to be a part of a relationship that she's not in. So that sounds like a fantasy to her. It's the same as, if we have a particular television show or movie that we love a relationship in and we watch a lot because we picture ourselves as one of the characters, that kind of thing, only this is like a real life version where like she gets to stand in literally for one of the characters in this relationship.
Yes. I mean, this connection is everywhere. And I think that's one of the things that starts bringing him back into reality. Like out of the fantasy of Samantha is like signing the divorce papers with his wife and kind of her confronting him on, yeah, that's great. You've course, you fell in love with your computer, that you don't have to deal with real feelings in real life. Kind of like naming his escapism a little bit. And that kind of breaks the fantasy a little bit. And then you kind of move forward and...
I was surprised in the conversation how freely he said she's an operating system, because they like meet and they're having a lunch or something like that, and she asks, "Are you seeing anybody?" And he says, "Yeah," and he kind of starts to talk about her in general ways that are a little, I don't want to say intentionally misleading, but you kind of, because we know, so it kind of feels like he's purposefully holding back. And then he just says, "Oh yeah, she's an operating system," and his ex-wife's like, "What?"
Well, interestingly, she is the only one who bats an eye when he tells them that he's dating an operating system.
That's right, because he told Chris Pratt, and Chris Pratt was just like, "Cool."
His office buddy says, "Cool," doesn't bat an eye. Amy Adams, his friend who's going through her own divorce.
Was that his? I thought it might have been his sister. Was that his friend?
That's just her friend.
Okay.
Yeah. She's like, me too. She was starting to bond with her operating system. So in this futuristic time, no one's batting an eye really about being in love with an operating system. But his wife is like, "Are you kidding me? You're in love with your computer. Awesome." So that was interesting to me. That
Do you think that something about that clicked into place with her to where she felt like she understood him a little bit more? Because I know that, like, I've had clients before where when disclosure happens with their spouse, for years, the spouse had suspected something was off, but the client had continually said to them, "No, everything's fine, whatever." But they, people, especially our primary attachment figures, are perceptive and pick up on things. So they feel it, they know it, they just can't name it, they can't put the finger on it. So then when they find out, what ends up happening is there is the betrayal feeling, right? But there's also this, like, I don't even want to call it a secondary betrayal, because in a lot of ways it feels primary, where it was like, you made me think I was crazy for all of these years. And it turns out I was not. I was actually the most sane, and
kind of realizing you've been gaslighted.
Yeah, I was right, and you were telling. So I wonder if maybe something about that moment with her clicked in, where it was like, we had this disconnect for so long, and he kept saying, "No, it's not. Everything's fine, whatever." And then, "Oh, you're falling in love with your computer." That makes so much sense now.
But what would she have been naming that she couldn't name before? When he said, "I'm in love with my computer, I'm dating my computer," it's kind of like she knew something was off. But what would you say she was naming that she couldn't name before?
Maybe it's that inability to have true intimacy. Maybe it's that inability to show up, to pay the price of vulnerability to get intimacy.
I think she did. Yeah, I think you're right on. So she even said, "Oh, well, that's great, because you never really could handle real human feelings."
Yeah.
And he starts to say, "Well, what would you know about real human feelings?" Because he's the more emotional, kind of sentimental one in the relationship. Do you remember that?
Yeah, now that you're saying it that way, I'm kind of wondering if he really is. Because, like, he may certainly be the more sensitive one, but am I really... Now, we are all emotional beings, right? But am I really, like, I don't know, is it the same if I can't tolerate and engage with your emotions at all, and all I want is for you to hear mine and meet mine?
But I think we're back to your point. Can he be intimate?
Yeah.
Because I think that's what you're hinting at. Is like, he can be all feely and squishy on the inside and write Hallmark cards and be perceptive, but can he risk to be intimate?
Yeah.
Is he willing to be vulnerable? And it sounds like she kind of had all her emotions out there all the time. And could be volatile even, but she was showing up with more of her. And then does that make sense?
Oh, it makes total sense.
And then he says, when Samantha's like, "What went wrong in the marriage, or why is she so angry at you?" He said, "I hid myself from her in our relationship." So it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like he didn't show up. He wasn't willing or couldn't, or had a hard time showing up with all of himself.
which if I don't think that I got this from the character, but let's say that he's a guy who is really comfortable using words of affirmation,
Right.
like just saying flowery, I can't pronounce flowery language, sweet language, affirming language, but never brings his true heart to the table.
That's it.
What a great job for him to have, where he gets to write those letters.
Yep.
And literally never show up, like never pay the price.
Oh, 100%. And then it shows up when he sex chatted the woman at night, and it was like he had the scripted message to her
and
about.
Boy, does she go off the script!
Right, she goes. This is where I get blushy, you know. She goes off script for sure, but it's like those words just flow out of him.
Yeah.
But he is not with an embodied woman. He is chatting with a woman that's in his imagination. So
that part was really funny to me, because he is following a script, like you said, and then it's kind of like what are you wearing? Oh, I'm wearing this. Oh, how do you feel? Oh, I feel this way. What do you want? I want this. And then all of a sudden the one on the other end goes, I want you to choke me with that dead cat. And he's like, what? Pick up the cat and use the cat to choke me. And
speaking of disconnected,
yeah,
he's like, I'm off. I'm going offline now.
Yeah.
I'm done.
And I think that's a good example, because a lot of times, at least in the work that I do, typically you've got a partner that is trying to be more engaged and a partner who is, I don't know if they're trying to be disengaged.
They're avoidant.
But they're avoidant.
Sure.
Yeah. And in that case, it seemed like you had two avoidant disengaged, which they had never met. They were strangers on an audio chat room on the internet.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's probably why they're showing up there.
Right.
But like, they weren't even attuned to each other in the moment. I'm thinking of it like a conversation, like a game of tennis where one serves and volley. It was more like they both tried serving, or really one of them just set up a machine on the other side to just keep hitting balls so they could keep, you know, returning or whatever. They just went into business for themselves.
He seemed more attuned to her.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Which goes back to his mom
Dead
issues,
cat.
you know, like mom, it always
Yeah.
was about mom. I don't know. It just seems like they threw that little plug in there for a reason, but maybe I'm just overanalyzing
Well, I think that it makes a lot of sense. You know, if we think about attachment, if we think about systems and family of origin stuff, we kind of get built, at least our original operating system gets built by our parents or by the people who raise us, you know, if it's not our parents.
Yeah.
And so if we just operate in that default mode for the rest of our lives, then obviously the messages, both explicit and implicit, that they put into us are going to govern the way that we conceptualize and understand and interact with the world.
Right. Your needs and feelings don't really matter as much as mine, says mom,
Yeah.
you know.
Or, you know, well, people in our family don't do this, or they
Right.
always do this, or this is what we believe about other people, or whatever that is. And so if you just never update that software to use, you know, operating system language, then you're just going to keep running on that. And I know that a lot of my clients kind of grapple with the, oh gosh, I just feel shame because I'm an adult that's just now learning this stuff. And then I'll always try to like join with them and normalize and just say like, but if nobody taught you, how could you learn?
Yep, that's the
And also, thank goodness that you're having
doing
the
it now.
opportunity to do it now,
Absolutely.
rather than when you're 65.
Right.
Or if they're 65, rather than when you're 85 or whatever it is, you have the opportunity right now.
And 99.9% of the people sitting in my office, including myself, didn't get that language to talk about their insides and their feelings and needs. You know, that was kind of off limits. So here we all are learning as grown-ups.
And why was it off limits? It was because nobody taught our parents.
Correct.
And so they are just in their default mode doing the best they can.
Yep.
But we all have the opportunity to do our own work. Usually something's got to incite that.
Right.
We've got to like kind of take the red pill and come awake to the fact that we have a need that's not getting met. But whatever that is, once we kind of come online to it, we have the opportunity.
Yeah, it just takes a ton of courage.
Yeah,
Everybody
it
that walks
does.
in my office, I'm like, wow, you are a person of deep desire and great courage.
Yeah.
To-
I always,
yeah.
if a potential client contacts me, I always start with, thank you so much for reaching out. You know, it's such a step of boldness and courage and faith in yourself to believe that help can be found and to embrace your desire for it.
Yeah. Humility too, I would add that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, like I don't have all the answers. I can't get to where I want to get by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I need help.
Yeah.
That takes a lot of humility.
That's the basic tenet for 12 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Is there anything else from the movie that sticks out to you that you want to touch
Well,
on?
I guess I started with this, but just if I had to say, well, it's probably two things, but what is just pervasive in our culture is epidemic loneliness. And I think it's just, that might be, there's some sexual scenes that are a little uncomfortable. I don't think that's what's disturbing when people watch this movie. I think it's the melancholy, the loneliness, and the places we will go to satisfy that loneliness, the extremes we will go to.
Meeting a legitimate need in an illegitimate way. There's a scene that is so banal in the movie that strikes me so hard. He's just walking on a sidewalk or something, and the camera begins to pan around to other people. Every one of them an earpiece in, every one of them talking, none of them looking up. They're all looking at the sidewalk or, just kind of not interacting with any real people around them, but rather just with their operating system thing.
And I think everybody feels that like we feel it. So when people watch the movie, it's just like a mirror, and it's disturbing, and it's sad, and it's lonely. And so I think this movie is just, I will be curious to talk to my friends who I've asked to watch the movie. Just, I've gotten so many different, it stirs up so many different feelings, but I'm going to put money on the most disturbing thing is the loneliness. Like that really touches, that really connects with people.
I wonder if it brings up shame in anybody too, because of how close it is.
Yeah.
Like if it's almost like a mirror.
The where we go with our loneliness, or just the loneliness itself?
Yes and yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That part that I just mentioned, it reminded me. So Leanne, my wife, she went to grad school in New York City. And when I went up to visit her for a week once, and I stayed in an Airbnb that was 2 subway stops away. And so every day I would meet her at her place, or she'd come to my place, and we'd go, she lived in Queens, we'd go into the city and adventure around and, hit something ridiculous like 30,000 steps on the watch or something like that.
Yeah.
But I was always struck when I would get on the subway there, A, by how many people were on the subway with me, and B, how every single one of them had on a pair of headphones and was staring at their phone or listening to music or whatnot. And I told her, like, this place is great to visit for a week. I think anything past that, though, I would feel so lonely and isolated while I was in the middle of so many people, which to me...
Isn't that the worst kind, though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To me, so I remember after I entered in therapy as a client, I several times would fly to different states on job interviews and things like that. And I remember identifying specifically, the most potent brand of lonely that I can feel is when I'm in an airport or on a plane around a bunch of people, but not engaging with any of them. It was this like reminder of how lonely I felt. Right. It was like a scene from Enter the Dragon, where Bruce Lee enters that like house of mirrors, and he's standing someplace, but there's so many mirrors around him that it shows him like 27 versions of himself. And so it felt like if I'm at an airport and there's all these people around, but I can't connect with any of them, right. Man, how alone am I?
Or even worse, places where you expect connection and there's none to be found.
Or it's denied.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
rejected.
like
Wow.
So I think that's, if I had to guess, that's going to be what is most disturbing, because things that aren't really real or don't feel real or you can't connect to usually aren't disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the things that get a
You're
little
able to
close
separate
to
more.
home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it kind of gets a little too close to home.
It's why Freddy and Jason aren't scary to me, but The Exorcist terrifies me. Like it's a little more real.
Right.
And
I think Spike Jonze made this movie feel real on purpose. You know, like,
that's why, like,
because it's not like Avatar. It's not futuristic with Avatar bodies.
Yeah.
It's people in khakis and button down Oxford shirts that look and smell like us. You know. So
well, we don't know how they smell.
Well, sure.
Some of them look like they smell bad. That's why when you
Sensation.
originally proposed the movie, I just thought, oh, that's perfect, because it's so close to home. Like, it's so close to where we're really at that we can actually have a conversation about, hey, here's this. It's almost like, here's the real world, and let's turn it 15 degrees. We're not going to turn it 90. We're not going to turn it 180.
No,
just a
a
little
tilt.
bit, just a little bit, enough to where we can get some dissonance, but not total dissonance.
And I think maybe that's part of his choice to use a computer as the surrogate in the romantic relationship, because we can distance a little bit. Yeah. But that relationship stirs up all the same human feelings.
You know, what's interesting is 2 weeks ago we covered the movie Lars and the Real Girl.
I thought about doing a more, that's funny, when I was like, ooh, is this too racy? I'm not really recommending this for young listeners, you know. I thought about Lars and the Real Girl, and I was like, just because it's the inflatable doll, and then I looked on your podcast, and someone had just done that movie. Yeah, but then it was on a totally different topic, and so I was like, that is bizarre. I was like, that is such an obscure movie.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is it makes me think. I wonder if instead of an operating system, they would have picked a tangible thing, like maybe a sex doll, or even just something like a robot. Like, would it have had the same punch? Would it have had the same effect?
I don't think so, because I think I was imagining, I mean, I could hear Scarlett Johansson's voice as Samantha, so I had a visual, but I think he purposely wanted us to create someone in our own minds, you know? I think he left it.
Well, and I think, let's be honest, every one of us in our lives at one point or another have encountered in a relationship distance or disconnection, and every one of us have at least imagined, what if it wasn't like this? What if it was the way I wanted it to be? Like, if we had a blank piece of butcher paper and we could just draw exactly how we wanted it.
Sure.
What if it was like this? I think that at the least, at the most, maybe we've slipped all the way into fantasy and started to construct this, you know, world in our mind of whatever as a way to escape. I remember listening to John Gottman on a show one time where he talked about that being an element of contempt. This kind of like, you know, it's not just distaste or dislike or hate, but it's also imagining that things would be better if the other was different or the other was better. And it's not just an accepting of them as another human who has the same level of value as you.
Yeah, I think that would be one of the core needs that this movie was screaming, like the human need for acceptance of all of me and all of my parts, and you know, so it's huge.
So, question for you: tell me something that your clients have taught you.
So many things every day.
That's why I don't say tell me the best thing or the top thing. Just tell me one thing.
One thing. The word that comes to mind is remind me more than teach me, because I feel like it's something I relearn every day. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm going two different directions, and I'm going to land on one of the two. Wow, let's see. Oh, can I say two things?
100%.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. So two things. One is no one does well in life without the right relationships. And I don't mean a husband or a wife. I just mean without relationships. Like it's like if all else fails, if I have relationships and with people who care about me and love me and know me, I'm going to be okay. You know, like I just feel like, so back to the loneliness theme, how absolutely important it is. Like if I could magic pill someone and just give them something, I would give them relationships. You know, and so I think it's a constant reminder of how, if all else fails, like that's what I want to personally invest in.
Does that come from training, or does that come from your lived experience?
Or
not C, all of the
probably
above?
Training would be last on the list.
Yeah.
First would be kind of both my own experience in life and my friends and my clients, like just listening and watching people, and what is most painful. And then I would say two, kind of along with that, because I think they're connected, is the thing that is at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of the barrel with what is most holding people back is the negative shame messages that they carry about who they are, their misunderstanding of who they are. It feels like every time, whether we start with addiction or we start with depression or we start with anxiety or we start with whatever it is, at the bottom of the bottom is like these beliefs about myself. And so I say that in relation, like, so the way out of shame is like shame grows in isolation, right? So is the way out is relationship. My voice, I could love you to pieces and delight in every part of you, but my voice is not enough. And to change those negative messages, like I need to be in relationship with people who see me and know me and can tell me the truth about myself. That's where, in part, where change happens.
And I think to a certain degree, it's that intrapersonal relationship too. Like I need to be able to engage with my true self.
Right.
And even the parts of me that I'm ashamed of, and drag those things kicking and screaming out into the light, because shame does only grow in the dark. Its modus operandi is isolation. It's those messages of nobody will ever understand. If they did know the real you, they would cast you out. They would discard you. And so even just encountering those in my own self and being able to speak them to another person, because there's no way to overcome shame unless you let it outside of you.
Right.
Wow.
So it's like I'm just reminded of that daily, you know. So I think it's a constant challenge and a reset for me on both. Yeah. And so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me, so this is the new question that we've introduced as a part of Love Month, and it has to do with loving yourself. But like, tell me something that you do to take care of yourself.
Yeah. I would say the two non-negotiables are my own therapy. I just think in the work that I do, but probably even if I didn't do this work, I'm never going to be at the bottom of me. I'm hopefully will be learning me for the rest of my life. And I have precious people that I'm trying to care for and help them get to the bottom of themselves and grow and change. And so I've got to be so aware of me and how my stuff's getting in the way. And so to me, that is self-care for me, and it's self-care, it's care for them, it's care for everyone.
Can you care for others if you're not caring for yourself?
Not very long.
Yeah. It's like a cup that has water in it, and you try to pour it out. You're going to run out of water if you don't put more water in it. And
then you're going to use your clients, and then you're going to, all bad stuff happens.
So that was one.
Yeah. And for me, yoga is like kind of a non-negotiable, just carrying things in my body and just having a release, a regular practice, I think is.
Wow. As 100%. Somebody who is just beginning yoga, me, what would you offer me on the beginning of the journey. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll say this.
It's harder than it looks.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
So I've done the insanity workout 3 times, and it's 2 months with 1 week in the middle. And month 1 is just super tough. Month 2 is super tough. The week in the middle is a quote unquote rest week that you're just doing yoga every day. Mm-hmm. And I remember during that week thinking, well, this is just going into that week, I should say, right. This is just patty cake, whatever. And then being in some of those poses and being like pouring sweat mm-hmm. more than when I was doing high knees or mountain mm-hmm. climbers or things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, yeah. I mean, but I'm using DVDs. I don't have a. Yeah. I'm not going someplace.
I don't know. I've historically been a kind of a intense sports, kind of mm-hmm. like half marathons and biking, and so yoga was like, oh, that's for sissies kind of thing. It is way harder than for me and my body and how my body is wired. It is harder than all of those things. But I think for me, breathing has been. In terms of yoga, like just realizing when I'm not breathing, because I am aware now in a session, if I'm not breathing, I'm just way more aware of it. And I'm like, oh, and then my leg tightens and then I feel my abs tighten and I'm like, whoa. And so it's just awareness of my body.
Wow.
Is like,
so it has improved your ability to be in your own body, to be in the here and now, and to notice what's going on in you.
Right, because I'll notice things in my body and my breathing before I'll know what I'm feeling. So because I'm so...
The body keeps a score.
Yeah, wow. That's it. But it really helps because I'm like, if I'm feeling this tight, this client is probably feeling my tight. And so it just helps me like, just be aware of, all right, what is going on, whether it's in the middle of a session or after. And just breathe. Often that's just the answer is just to take.
And isn't it
breathe.
Weird how that is an actual tool that can help is to just breathe.
And all my life not realizing that I wasn't breathing. Like that's just how my body was just holding it all, like death grip. Yeah.
I think that, that's something that as a client in therapy and as a therapist that I've encountered so much is sometimes the thing that helps the most is the simplest, mm-hmm. most common thing that has become uncommon due to like a lack of awareness or a lack of intentional engagement mm-hmm. or it's just that Occam's razor, like, well, there's the answer just laying right there on the floor but we're just not looking at it.
The most simple things. Yeah.
Wow.
So learning to breathe, I guess it would be. Yeah.
Wow. So let's say that somebody's listening to the show today and they're just thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, I have just loved hearing what she has to say and think I can connect with her, and they want to see you as a client. How can they do that?
I'm an old school email girl. So have a website that we just updated. Just brought on a fantastic, dear new therapist, Jenny Black. So we just sent out an email and kind of added her to the website. So I think that would be a good place to get a feel for what Come Alive Counseling is about, a little bit of our kind of perspective on counseling and who we are. And then it has a bio. There are 4 of us right now. We're new, just started in 2018. So
I think I was in class with one of your therapists, Amy.
Yeah, Amy Fowler, yeah. So and then Richard Cowan is our male representative right now. And he's a Vandy grad. And so you can read about them on the website. And there's all kinds of, we've got book an appointment all over the website. And you can pick your the therapist you want to contact. And just email them. It's probably the easiest way.
So to get to you, they would go to the website, find your bio, book an appointment?
Mm-hmm. That's probably the easiest.
What's the website?
You don't even have to remember
nice.
the email address. It's Come Alive Counseling. So it's www. and comealivecounseling.com.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Mel, thank you so much for coming on today. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just appreciate your willingness to tackle this movie because there is no question in me that you put so much thought into it. And I think that one of the things I love the most about this show is that, here it is, we engage with a piece of art that maybe doesn't necessarily line up with what we think and believe, but stirs discussion about something that we know is important. And so I always think, like with anybody that does therapy for a living or does therapy as a client, it just shows courage to walk into material that maybe tackles an aspect of mental health or relationships that is scary to talk about.
Or you don't have all the answers to.
Yeah. Because we, as therapists, we don't have all the answers.
No.
In fact, most of the time, it's just a matter of walking with the client until they find their answer.
That's right. That's
wow.
right.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. I think that this episode was such an incredible example of taking a movie that initially, the first time that I saw it, I did not like it at all. I kind of thought it was boring. I kind of thought it was a little weird. And I don't even think that I have traditionally been a fan of Spike Jonze's stuff. And for me, I think because of where he is in his career right now, Joaquin Phoenix is either a home run or a strikeout for me. And there's really not anywhere in between, which, props to that guy because he takes big swings all day long. And when you take big swings, you're going to hit it out of the park or you're going to have a major whiff. But this movie is a great example of one that can be used to talk about something that is so important. And I think that, the through line of this movie and this conversation with Melanie was loneliness. And I can't help but think that, the day that this episode is coming out, February the 13th, the next day, Friday, tomorrow, that's going to be Valentine's Day. And I know that this time of year, Valentine's Day, for some, is a celebration of love. For some, it's an excuse to gripe about how Hallmark has capitalized love and affection and commoditized it and, made a buck off of all of us. And for some, it's a reminder of their singleness, or it's a reminder of their loneliness. And I want to take just a second and speak to that and just say to you that regardless of whether you have a romantic partner or not, regardless of whether you're in a relationship, you are valuable. You're wanted. You're loved. And I know, for me, Leanne and I got married in 2017, and I was 36. So, I was someone who got married later on in life. And there were many years where I got really down. And around Valentine's Day, I got really sad because I wasn't with someone. And I know that I didn't know during those times. I found out later as a part of my own therapy as a client. But once in my own therapy, I learned how to connect with myself better. I learned how to invest in my intrapersonal relationship, my relationship with myself. What I found was I still had the longing, I still had the desire, I still had the want to be in a relationship. But there was something about the pangs that I experienced during those times that became different. It wasn't the same kind of loneliness. It wasn't this kind of like all-encompassing black hole sucking me in, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Nobody's ever going to love me kind of loneliness. It felt more like once I learned how to connect with my own heart, once I learned how to connect with my own self, it felt more like, gosh, I really want to be with somebody, but I'm okay right now. And I think a lot of that, was because learning how to connect with myself allowed me to connect with others better in a more whole way. There was more me that I could bring to the table. And I don't just mean connect with others romantically. I mean connect with them at a friendship level as well. And I think that was, a step on the staircase towards eventually meeting Leanne and falling in love and getting married. And so, regardless of your relationship status tomorrow on Valentine's Day, what I want you to know is that a romantic relationship isn't the only one that counts. A relationship with yourself and a relationship with the other people who love you, friends, family, that counts too. And so if tomorrow, if you're starting to feel down, drop me an email, therapisttheater@gmail.com, and I'll shoot you back something. Because I want you to know you're not alone. You have others who care about you. Quick announcement. Of course, you may have, if you tuned into the show last week all the way to the end, you may know that this week our guest was gonna be Dr. Terry Murphy. We had some scheduling issues that came up, and so we have bumped that show to next week, and we'll be discussing with her marriage story. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.